Hey there YouTube, Rain here. I woke up this morning to snow in Colorado, and that's kind of surprising given that it's September. And the final release of the Tarkir spoilers, which I am super excited about. So I'm going to be covering one color at a time, and then I'm going to be getting into a little bit of talking about the format, what I think is going to be good for the pre-release, but that comes later. For now, let's get into the white cards. We have Absam Battle Priest, which is 3 and a white for a 3/2 Outlast 1 white. It says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink. Absam Battle Priest is good in an Outlast deck. A 3/2 isn't that good as a body as on its own because there are a lot of 2/2s, 2/1s, and 4/4s in this format, so a 3/2 is just not where you want to be. But the universal lifelink gets some additional value to a cheap Outlast ability that if you activate it once, suddenly you're a very good body. Next up, we have Abzan Falconer. It is 2 and a white for a creature with Outlast 1 white. It says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying, and he's a 2/3. This is probably my favorite Outlast card in this format that's just monocolor right now. This guy makes all your creatures with +1/+1 counters flying, so you can like surprise I have flying on your combat tricks, or like just even himself 3 mana and then 1 mana to make him a 3/4 flyer is really good, and you're just gonna start rushing them down with flyers and they can't block you. This I would almost consider it a bomb in the Outlast deck, just because of this ability that gives all your creatures flying, pretty much. Next up, we have Anok Bondkin. It is 1 and a white for a 2/1 with Outlast 1 and a white. It says each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has First Strike. First Strike is also a fantastic ability in combat, much better than the lifelink, but not as good as the flying. It's better on defense. You get 2 guys with First Strike blocking a bigger guy. Suddenly that bigger guy doesn't even get to kill one of them. The Outlast ability 2 mana is a lot more expensive than 1 mana. You're paying twice the amount. But it's not unreasonably expensive. You get this Outlast off once, you have a 3/2 with First Strike that's pretty good at blocking the early guys. You get it off another time, you have a 4/3 First Strike that's just a very good body by itself. So it's a bit of a mana sink, but the Universal First Strike is amazing, and he's just a very good card. Next up, we have Alabaster Kirin. It is 3 and a white for a 2/3 Flying Vigilance. This is a card where if you don't have a lot of flying in your deck, you're happier playing this sort of card. What you need to look at is how it differs from a typical on-curve flyer. So you're paying 4 mana instead of 3 mana for a 2-power flyer. So what you're gaining for that extra mana is 1 extra toughness and vigilance. So he blocks all the low power flyers really well, and he can also attack into them and be able to block the same turn he attacks. So yeah, the upsides just basically say if you don't have a lot of flyers, this card becomes better. As it stands, he's an okay card on his own. Next up, we have Brave the Sands. 1 and a white for an enchantment that says creatures you control have vigilance, and each creature you control can block an additional creature. This card is unplayable. Both the modes of it aren't going to get you that much value over a game, and it's certainly not a card. So just never play this card. Next up, we have Dazzling Ramparts. It is 4 and a white for a 0/7 defender with 1 and a white, tap target creature. Now, 5 mana for a 0/7 is not a card I'm happy to play, not excited to play most of the time. Some formats I'll say it's acceptable. This format might be one of them. I'd be happier if this ability was like 1 and a white, tap target creature, use this ability only once per turn, or just tap target creature. As it stands, you can either block with this guy or tap a guy pre-combat. You can't do both. And you have to pay mana to tap a guy as well. So this card, I think, is actually going to be unplayable. Maybe you side it in if they have something you just simply can't answer and you need a guy to tap down that guy. Next up, we have Defiant Strike. It is 1 white for an instant that says target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and draw a card. This is a very good card for the red, white, blue clan, the Jeskai clan. When you can turn this, target creature gets +1/+0 into activate prowess, and then target creature gets +1/+0. So it's going to be very good in those decks, especially since it draws you a card afterwards. In a typical deck, the effect of target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn doesn't make it worth playing this card, even though it cantrips. So unplayable unless you have a good amount of prowess is what I want to say for this card. Not unplayable, just really bad if you don't have the prowess. Next up, we have End Hostilities. It is 3 and 2 white for a sorcery that says destroy all creatures and all permanents attached to creatures. And in the format, there are a few equipment, but not any that are bomb-worthy and not any that make this second line of all permanents attached to creatures showing up a lot. So it's just a little bit of extra value in some games. You're mostly playing 5 mana for a destroy all creatures effect. In Limited, it's harder to read a 5 mana Wrath versus a 4 mana Wrath than it is in Constructed. Destroying all creatures basically says you have an equal board, you just hold this card in your hand and draw some threats until their board is a lot better than yours, and you're just like, destroy all creatures, my hand is full of threats, and you have nothing. If they're winning, you can just reset the board, say, let's start from here. So the sort of card does slow down a format, and that's worthy to note. Next up, we have Erase. It is 1 white for an instant that says exile target enchantment. This is a sideboard card. If there are a lot of enchantments or a few enchantments that you just can't deal with, this will do the job. It'll stop them down. Just don't play this in the main deck. Next up, we have Feat of Resistance. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Costs 1 and a white and is also an instant. And lastly, it's common. So this is an amazing card. If you look at the Abzan guilds, you can suddenly, this can turn into like put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature you control. It gains first strike and protection from the color of your choice, or something like that with the sort of universal abilities there. This is a great combat trick. Giving your creatures protection gives you protection from removal, gives you the ability to win combat, getting some extra value by putting +1/+1 counters on creatures. It triggers prowess as well, so I'm happy playing it in my red, white, blue decks. This is a great combat trick, and one that you should expect to see. If they're holding 1 and a white up, since this is common, you should expect this might be one of the things they have. Next up, we have Firehoof Cavalry. I don't want to get into this card too much. You can read it. It's really expensive, doesn't give you much. It's a 1 mana 1/1, which are unplayable. So this guy is awful. Never play this guy, plain and simply. Next up, we have Herald of Anafenza. It is 1 white for a 1/2 with Outlast, 2 and a white. And it says, whenever you activate Herald of Anafenza's Outlast ability, put a 1/1 white warrior creature token onto the battlefield. Now, despite the fact that this card is white, I think it's very much black-white. There are a few black-white cards that make these warrior creatures better, and giving a guy for raid in the red-white-black clan, as well as the Outlast giving another guy with counters, and the green-white-black clan. Just screamed to me that this works well with black-white decks. He's very good for the reasons I said. His Outlast is much slower than any other Outlast we've seen so far, so that's something to note, but he should be good. Next up, we have High Sentinels of Irration. 3 and a white for a 3/4 flyer. High Sentinels of Irration gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. 3 and a white, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This is a bomb. This is a great bomb in Abzan decks, the green-white-black decks. This is already, you're paying 4 mana for a 3-power flyer. That's 1 less than you should be paying. You get an extra point of toughness, and your 4-drop can start swinging in the air for 5 just at really early turns, and he enables himself. This card is ridiculous. It is very, very good. Next up, we have Jeskai Student. 1 and a white for a 1/3 prowess. So this is the sort of defensive creature that you might be looking to play in some of the Jeskai decks. I actually think that Jeskai is going to be a very aggressive clan against everything but Mardu. So maybe I could see this being a side-in against Mardu decks. Or maybe you just play it. Maybe your deck's set up where you want to get to the late game and you have some expensive like flying crane technique and just need to get to 6 and then you win. So this guy should be fine if you're looking for a good early defensive play. Next up we have Kill Shot, 2 and a white for an instant that says destroy target attacking creature, and it's common. So Wizards is giving a big shout to you saying this format is going to be slow. This at common for this sort of removal is amazing. You're going to be seeing a lot of this card, and for good reason. They're going to have to attack you at some point, even if you're like ahead on board. This is kind of like an insurance policy. They drop a bomb, suddenly you're behind, except for this card. We'll just answer it. So, just a ridiculous removal card in this set. Next up, we have Mardu Hateblade. It is 1 white for a 1/1 that says Mardu Hateblade gains Death Touch until the end of turn for 1 black. Not much to say about this card other than it's slower than the typical Typhoid Rats, and you're never going to want to play this unless you're playing black. If you're splashing black, I wouldn't play this because you need to reliably be able to get black for this card to not be a 1 mana 1/1. So just keep that in mind. Next up is Mardu Horde Chief, 2 and a white for a 2/3 with Raid. So if you attacked with a creature this turn, put a 1/1 white warrior creature token onto the battlefield. There's some synergies with this, and again, just the warrior subtype. But overall, I'm a fan of 2/3s in this format. This guy plus a morph guy can block a 4/4, and he can only kill one of them. So this sort of body is very good for being on the defense in this format. You can also use this 1/1 to get raid later on, so you get a little bit of extra value. So this guy's okay, especially in Mardu decks. Next up, we have Master of Pearls, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Morph, and the flip-up cost being 3 and 2 white. Says whenever Master of Pearls is turned face up, creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. So I expect a lot of boards in this format to be clogged with creatures, like 3 to 6 creatures on each side, because there just isn't a way to attack, and there are double blocks and combination thereof to make it good for you. So this guy gets really, really good in those sorts of boards where everybody has a lot of creatures. Suddenly you can start breaking through. He will trade with a 4/4, which is good because later on that body isn't relevant, and he'll get all your guys like starting to just eat up their guys and start breaking that board state. So he's very good. He's not a bomb, but he's very good. Next up, we have Rush of Battle. It is 3 and a white for a sorcery that says creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Warrior creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. This is unplayable. The fact that it's sorcery speed just completely ruins this card. Suddenly, your prowess isn't a surprise. Lifelink isn't actually very relevant in a slower format. So yeah, this card is awful. Next up, we have Sage-Eye Harrier, 4 and a white for a 1/5 flying with Morph, 3 and a white as the flip-up cost. Now, for 5 mana, I'm not excited about this card. I'm actually more excited paying 3 and then 4 for this card, even though it's more expensive. The fact that he'll slow the game down by a lot by blocking all the early drop air and ground guys means that that sort of 2-turn commitment isn't going to hinder you as much over time. That said, he's fine to drop on 5, and he'll just block guys for forever. Next up, we have Salt Road Patrol, 3 and a white for a 2/5 with Outlast, 1 and a white. So about middle of the road in terms of expensiveness for the Outlast, but he's a very good blocker, and he's another guy that can get counters on him, so play him in your Outlast decks. He'll be very fine. Next up, we have Seeker of the Way, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Prowess, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Seeker of the Way gains lifelink until end of turn. So this is a bear that doesn't drop off too much in the later parts of the game. He can force in a good amount of damage early on because of the Prowess threat, and he can just get you at a very reasonable life total against the Mardu decks too. So he's good in every matchup pretty much. He's one of the better bears in the format. Next up, we have Siegecraft. It is an aura, and it doesn't consistently get you value, so don't play this card ever. You're going to end up getting 2 for 1, especially with the amount of removal in the set, and you're going to be unhappy. Next, we have a reprint, Smite the Monstrous. 3 and a white for an instant with destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Smite the Monstrous has never been better. So many 4/4s, so many good targets for this card, and the format is slow enough where the inconsistency of not being able to hit some creatures just completely gets blown out of the water. This is fantastic. And at common, so that's another thing to note. Suspension Field, 1 and a white for an enchantment that says whenever Suspension Field enters the battlefield, you may exile target creature with toughness 3 or greater until Suspension Field leaves the battlefield. Not much to say about this card other than it's really good removal, so you're going to play every single copy you get and be very happy with them. Next we have Take Up Arms, 4 and a white for an instant that says put 3 1/1 white warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. This card is unplayable. I don't think the warrior deck is very good, but if that's what you're set up to have, then I suppose this card is fine. But it's not good for triggering prowess, it's not good for triggering great, it's just way too expensive for both of those things. And a 3/3 for 5 is unplayable, especially in a 4/4 format. Next up, we have Timely Hordemate, 3 and a white for a 3/2 with Raid. If you attacked with a creature, target creature card you control with converted mana cost 2 or less, you get to bring it back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Unless you have a really good 2-drop, I would not consider playing this card. A 3/2 is really, again, really bad when there are a lot of 4/4s, 2/1s, and 2/2s. So yeah, this ability has to be what makes it worth playing to you. Next up, we have Venerable Lammasu, 6 and a white for a 5/4 flyer. Now this is the final test because there have been a lot of on-curve flyers at this sort of 6-7 mana range, and 7 mana is the on-curve for a 5-power flyer. But they've just been way too slow being vanilla to actually play. I'm going to say this card is mostly unplayable, despite the fact that it's on curve, just because it doesn't do anything else for 7 mana. There might be some situations where you can side this in or this card will be okay, but most situations I would say it's just way too expensive and doesn't do enough. Next up, we have War Behemoth, a 5 and a white for a 3/6 with Morph, and the flip-up cost being 4 and a white. So this is a good defensive guy, not wanting to play him for 6, I'm wanting to flip him up and yet again use that really defensive body to make up for the loss of tempo that you get for playing this for 5 for 3 and then 5. So he should be fine. Most likely you're going to be morphing this guy. Next up we have Watcher of the Roost, 2 and a white for a 2/1 flying with Morph, and the flip-up cost being reveal a white card in your hand, and when Watcher of the Roost is turned face up, you gain 2 life. This is my second favorite in the cycle. There's a cycle for each of the colors, but it does a lot of things. It hides a flying defender, it hides a flying attacker, and you can attack when you flip it up, assuming it's not the turn you played it. And you get 2 life, which isn't as much as the other 2, but you're not going to say no. It's not that great, but it's fine. So this guy is very good. Last but not least is Wingmate Rock, 3 and 2 white for a 3/4 flyer. And let's just stop right there. 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer, like Nimbus of the Isles, already playable. So let's get to the rest of the card. Raid. When Wingmate Rock enters the battlefield, if you attacked with a creature this turn, put a 3/4 white bird creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And whenever Wingmate Rock attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking creature. 6 flying power for 5 mana is insane. There's no words to describe just how good getting this raid off is. And even if you don't get the raid off, this card is playable as a 5 mana 3/4 flyer with even a little bit of upside. That extra line there makes it harder for them to race you once you start getting in for 6 flying on turn 6. This card is insane. It's an absolute bomb. So that's it for all the white spoilers. Thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.